jazz pianist Deschanel Gordon. Welcome, Deschanel.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No worries. It's so nice to have you here. As a recent graduate of Trinity Laban, he won BBC Young Musician, Jazz Musician 2020, and he's already making waves on the UK jazz scene. He's performed at many of London's best known jazz venues, including Ronnie Scott's, The Barbican, and Cadogan Hall. As well as performing in the UK, Deschanel has travelled widely, playing at jazz festivals throughout Europe and the USA. We'll be taking questions at the end, so if there's anything you want to ask Deschanel, please let us know in the chat if you're watching in the Zoom webinar or in the Facebook Live as well, and we'll hopefully pick them all up. So my first question for you today is obviously, what got you into jazz music?
Yeah, I think it was more of an accident, I would say. I think I was by then when I was younger, I was always just sounds always intrigued me, like no matter where it was coming from. And I remember I'd be watching cartoons and like certain sounds, be like, what is that? Like especially like Tom and Jerry and stuff like that. There's a lot of sophisticated music now. I think back to it, like in those cartoons, and some of it would just like my ear would be drawn to it, but I wouldn't be able to like pinpoint a style or something. But then also certain adverts in the adverts, like certain music would be playing like in these random adverts. I'm like, what is that? Like, I really like the sound of it, but I just couldn't pinpoint it. So I remember like learning music of an advert once, and then later on I found out it was blues. So that was like one of my first little introduction to jazz. Yeah.
That's amazing. Such an unconventional route.
Yeah.
What made you apply for conservatoire then, and Trinity in particular? I know they have a really good jazz course, but are there lots of different options for young jazz musicians at conservatoires?
Yeah, well, it's funny because when I was in secondary school, I was so into music and piano and jazz music, but it just didn't occur to me you could study at at like a university level. It was almost like a joke to me. I was like, you can study piano at university. I was like, so when I found out, I was like, wow, like okay, well, this is what I want to do. So around, I guess around year 12, when you're starting to look at the places you want to apply to, I was definitely dead set on staying in London at the time, I think. So I checked out the schools in London and I auditioned for Trinity. Yeah, Trinity and Academy. And I got reserved from Academy when I got into Trinity. So I decided to go to Trinity.
Nice. And could you talk us through what a typical day was like when you were there? I know you've very recently graduated.
Mm. I think so. It's really bad. I've kind of forgot because like my last year was like the pandemic, so I didn't even go in. So I mean, at that point, it would have been a few Zoom lessons. But in the beginning, it's definitely a bit more intense, yeah, especially in first year when like it got a lot more classes. So I think I'd have maybe like a 9 a.m. Like harmony class, I think. It was like 9:30 harmony class. So nice and early. And I was there on time. And we then would have an improv class in like around the afternoon. And then in the evenings, we would sometimes have our small band. So that's when there's a set group of people that you have, and you have like a teacher or mentor leading the group, and you're playing different songs and tunes. So yeah, that would have been the average day.
Hmm. Is there a kind of opportunity for your own composition then within that course?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Now as the course has changed a bit because whilst I was there, it was led by like the amazing Simon Purcell. He was a leader of the jazz course, but then he left and Hans Koller has taken over. And Hans is really into composition. So he brought on a new composition aspect to the course. So there's actually like a dedicated jazz composition class that everyone has to do. So yeah, that's been amazing.
Wow. Is that something you do a lot of within your own playing then?
It's something more recent, I'd say. I think I always like playing, but I really enjoy playing other people's songs and like the jazz standards and kind of jazz classics. I was really into exploring that and like understanding that at a deeper level. I've obviously like had ideas and stuff, but I wasn't some people are more drawn to like composing their own stuff that's been a more recent thing. I think over the lockdown, I had a lot of spare time. So I think that was when I became like an outlet for me to express some of what the stuff I was wanting to play.
Yeah, it's really, I think, vital for us to have those outlets outside of maybe what's our typical thing. Um, so, it can take over practice and rehearsals and things. So, what do you do to take yourself away from music in your downtime?
I like watching just random TV series. Like that's really fun for me. Going to the cinema as well, actually, because I hadn't had a chance to do that for a while. So now everywhere's opening up. It's like it's fun to go to the cinema. Just nice distraction.
What sort of genre of TV and film do you like?
I really like stuff that just like makes me think. Like I've been watching Handmaid's Tale,
Nice.
and that one's like it's very dark and very like kind of dystopian world. But it's like imagine if that world really existed. Like, well, yeah, I just like stuff that just makes me really question things.
So, back to music then, and what made you apply for BBC Young Jazz Musician?
Yeah, so it would have been last year June, like I guess still kind of in the pandemic. I guess things were opening up a tiny bit by then, but I think the pandemic was quite a special time for me because I've never had like that much time on my own to like literally just do anything I wanted, but in the confines of my room anyway. I happen to have a keyboard in my room, so how about a practice? So I really got into practice last year. It was just like really fun for me because even though I was in the conservatoire, I think having that space and like just having that space was just made me able to make the choice of wanting to actually dedicate myself to learning some stuff. So I was just ready in a really like strong, like motivated practice kind of mood. And then my friend Zoza, the previous winner of the competition, he messaged me and was like, "Oh, do you know the competition's happening? And I think you'll be eligible to apply." And I was like, "Oh wow, I didn't realize. I thought the pandemic could have like cut everything off." But he said, "Yeah, you can apply." So I was like, "Okay, well, I've been doing all this practice, so I might as well try." So I sent in like a video and stuff, and yeah, then I got through to the semi-finals and to the finals.
So, I was about to say, what was the application like? But you said it was a video submission. Is that typical, or was that because of the special circumstances?
Well, I think there's a few rounds actually. So the first round it's video submission. I think they're just trying to get a gauge of like the different musician styles and like levels. And then the second round was in person. So the semi-finals we did I think semi-finals was maybe 15 or 15, 20 people, I think maybe.
Yeah.
And we went to I think Bell Studios in Acton, and yeah, we went there and there was like a band waiting for us. We gave them the music and there's like a really short time to rehearse, maybe 10, 15 minutes. And it's like, go. There's the cameras and everything. It's like, well, it's quite nerve-wracking. But yeah. So you do the semi-finals and then I think you wait a few days and well, I forgot to say you're playing in front of a panel of three judges. I think the judges for me were Tim Garland, Zoe Rahman, and Byron Wallen. So like these are like my heroes. Like so it was quite intimidating actually like playing in front of them. But yeah, and then a few days later I got an email saying I was in the finals. So yeah.
Wow. So, about the final then, you were socially distanced on the stage. How did that affect the way that you connected with the other musicians?
I think it was very strange for me. I think it took a while to adjust because at that point I had been doing some gigs, but they were all like live stream gigs. So at that point, I kind of had an idea of the kind of vibe of just playing in an empty room with cameras. But when you like upgrade to somewhere like Cadogan Hall, and it's like so amazing, but like there's no people in there. It's quite an adjustment. So I think we had a chance to sound check and we played, and I was like I'm having fun, but it always felt like something was missing. And I was like, is it the music? But I didn't think it was the music, and then I guess I had to pinpoint it's just the fact that there was no one there. It was like it felt like just cameras and crew. But I think on the real thing when I played, I think I was just so into playing the piano and like the band and what the sound we were making. I think that was enough to like make me forget about it being, less, no people in the room with us.
Mm, yeah. So you talked about how the pandemic gave you a chance to do lots of practice at home by yourself, but we've also kind of noticed in our group of people who planned these questions that as music students, the pandemic has affected our nerves. Have you experienced this, and do you have any tips for young performers on handling nerves?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely an adjustment from going to playing, if you were playing regularly before, and then having like a year and a half of nothing. So to go back into the audience, yeah, it's definitely like an adjustment. I mean, for me, how I do with my nerves, I get really nervous sometimes, but it's always before I get to the piano. It's more like the anticipation of what's about to happen. That, and I'm like, once I'm at the piano, like piano is where I can lay it all out in a way. But I don't know. I think the best thing, what I do is just engross myself in the music as much as possible. So to really listen out to what the other musicians are playing, because if your mind is really focused on that, like slowly you over a while you'll be relaxed into the gig because the music is engrossing you. And I mean, at that point you might even be able to enjoy the audience, feeding off them, but definitely like really enjoying the people you're playing with, because those people is what's going to make you comfortable and what make you enjoy playing, and performing.
Oh, I'm actually no. I'm going to save the questions. There's some questions coming in. They're really interesting, but I'll save them for later.
Okay.
How, so our next one is, how did you build your music career? What were some of the bigger obstacles, setbacks, if there were any?
I guess I'm in the very early stages of my career, but I mean, I wouldn't say there's any major obstacles. I think it's definitely just taking your time and understanding that some stuff doesn't come quickly. Like it's stuff takes their time. I remember starting Trinity and like not knowing anyone like in terms of like a London jazz scene. I didn't have any connections or anything like that. It was more just like making sure I was a certain level on my instrument and then putting myself out there. So going to jam sessions, going like meeting, yeah, having chances to meet people so people can hear what you sound like. Because the danger is like going to conservatoire is you can practice loads and reach a really high level in the practice room by yourself. But then if no one knows what you sound like, then it's like you're really good, but no one's gonna book you for a gig because they don't know you. So I think definitely meeting people at jam sessions was a big thing for me, because it just meant that it always snowballed into something. Because if someone sees you play and they like you, they ask you to do something, then you do that thing, and someone else might see you, and then so that for me that was like a trend that was happening. I'd play with someone, and they would like how I sounded, and someone else would book me for a gig, and over time it's developed into being a pretty busy London jazz musician. So yeah.
It's like getting that exposure and getting yourself known. That's a really interesting point. Um, what are some of your highlights and some of your favourite people that you've played with so far?
I think recently, so I just mentioned that one of the judges at the semi-finals was a saxophonist called Tim Garland, and a few months ago, he asked me to do some recording with him. So I went to his studio and yeah, we recorded, and it was just great because Tim Garland was in the band, was a band member of the pianist Chick Corea, who died a few months ago, and he's like one of my all-time favorite like legendary piano players. So it was like, I mean, it was quite nerve-wracking to like play piano with Tim Garland when he's been playing with such a legend, but it was super inspiring. So that was definitely like, yeah, a recent highlight.
Um, so you mentioned Chick Corea there, who's amazing. Do you have any other kind of idols that you look up to within jazz music?
Yeah, I say one of my the earliest one was Oscar Peterson actually. I didn't say when you asked me the original question about how I got into jazz, but as well as watching cartoons and all the adverts, how I got to find out what the word jazz was because I somehow ended up on BBC Four at 10 years old. I just saw this guy playing piano. I was like, what is this? I was like, I recognize the sound from like all the stuff I was telling you about that I've heard, but I just didn't know it was. Then I heard the word jazz, and I was like, oh, and then I still didn't know who he was at the time. And later on, as I progressed in like my jazz studies, I was like, oh, that was Oscar Peterson. So yeah, he was the first big influence for me on piano. And as time's gone on, like piano players like Herbie Hancock has been like massive. There's certain piano players when you're a jazz pianist that you can't avoid. Like you have to like them. So I'll probably give you a basic answer. Like most people like the people I say. But yeah, Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, McCoy Tyner. There's a piano player called Mulgrew Miller that I really like. And modern day piano players from the UK as well. Like I'm a fan of this pianist called Ashley Henry. Um, and yeah, loads of people.
Do you ever find you have inspiration from people who maybe aren't pianists or other musicians?
Say that again, sir.
Do you ever find inspiration from other instrumentalists
Okay.
rather than just pianists, or do you find it's often just pianists you look to?
No, definitely. I learn a lot from other instrumentals. I think in another lifetime, I'd want to be a drummer. So I'm really into drums. I think yeah, I listen to a lot of drummers. So um, yeah, I've learned a lot from drummers too. So a lot of the in piano in jazz, one of the main formats is called piano trio, and that was something that was quite new to me when I started music college. And I had a chance to play piano trio at this venue called Kansas Smitty's in Hackney with this amazing drummer called Shane Forbes. And that was like a amazing just lesson every Sunday, playing of the drums and just hearing how his understanding of swing and rhythm and how I would respond like and have conversations with him. Yes, and yeah, drums is definitely something that affects my playing. Yeah.
Well, I feel like your answer might relate to what we were just talking about. My next question is: have you got anything exciting in the pipeline for the rest of this year or next year?
Yeah. I've got something really cool that I'm really excited about. I don't know if you watched the movie Soul.
Yeah, I love that
So
film.
I've been asked by from Disney to do some stuff for like Soul in the UK. They're gonna put on an event. So I'm gonna play all the songs from Soul. So yeah, I'm really excited about that.
Wow, that's so exciting. So have you got any key goals that you'd love to achieve within the next few years with your playing?
I definitely want to record my first album and hopefully next year, hopefully. Definitely get that out of the way. But yeah. And then from there, like I mean, tour Europe with my band and yeah, see how it goes from there.
Wow, that's really exciting. Um, have you got any advice for young aspiring musicians uh, who are looking to develop in the industry?
I'd say first of all, find music that you really love to listen to that really makes you feel something. Because with taking away everything, the first thing you want to do is like how does the thing you listen to make you feel? That's the most important thing. Because once you establish that and you have a love for the thing you're playing, I think everything else slowly unravels itself because you're that invested in it. So yeah, finding something you really love and then from there, I mean, obviously there's certain work you have to do, but I find that if you really enjoy something you do, you'll find ways to make stuff happen like automatically.
Mm. So, what sort of music do you listen to when you are relaxing? Do you have any artists you would like to recommend to people who are watching today?
Yeah, there's this amazing a bass player and singer called Thundercat, and he's got a jazz background, but then he does his whole other futuristic, just crazy business, and I'm a big fan of that. Yeah, so Thundercat, and sometimes yeah, when I don't want to listen to jazz, I listen to old school hip hop like Tribe Called Quest. I'm a big fan of that, and some neo soul like Erica Badu and D'Angelo. I love that stuff.
Great. But would you say the majority of what you listen to is tends to be jazz?
Yeah, it does. But like, especially in college, I used to have these things like I call it getting jazzed out, where I'd be like, oh, it's just too much. And the thing is, I love the music so much. Since I was 10, I was on YouTube for hours. that's all I did was listen to and watch jazz videos. But when I got to college, I was like, oh wow, like I do need to take a break. Like I do. Sometimes it was too much. So when that would happen, yeah, I would listen to like the opposite of like, I mean, off recently, I've been getting into punk music. Like there's a band called Bad Brains. I've been checking them out. But I think I'm into jazz right now. I think I
We might expect that, I guess. Yeah. So we've kind of covered this a bit already, but if people who are watching don't really know that much about jazz, but they'd like to get into it, what would you recommend as a starting point for them to have a listen to?
am. I'd say before even, I mean, it's obviously listening, but I'd say the visual aspect is quite important in jazz. So I mean, for me, what I did is once I found out about Oscar Peterson and jazz in the early stages, I was around 10, 11 years old. I went on YouTube, and then from there, it's amazing because you get to see it in action as well as hearing it. Like actually seeing the physicality of them playing the instrument and seeing this kind of all the musical conversations they're having is great because you can connect what you're hearing to something visual. And then from there, like you can go on this whole YouTube, like a YouTube wormhole of all these different type of players. But in the beginning, that was definitely useful for me because I was able to find stuff that I enjoyed, and then from there I could do further research and find out the albums that they did. And so yeah, definitely just finding something you like and then taking the time to see who's the musicians on the stuff you like, and then seeing and then checking them out and like finding out all the other stuff that they've done and seeing what resonates with you.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. So that's the end of the questions that we had pre-prepared for Deschanel. I've got some that people have already sent through with the Q&A. But if anyone else has got any questions, please leave them in the chat or in the live stream. So the first question we have is, how did you go about finding an agent?
Okay, well that was through the BBC Young Jazz Musician. So when I won, you get given an agent. Yeah.
Ah, very good. Um, and this person would like to know, because we were talking about films earlier, you say you like films that make you think. Do you think that this translates into your music? After all, jazz is one of the more thought-provoking music genres.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the paradox about jazz is like you do all this practice and all this theory, all this rhythm work, all this transcribing and imitation. But the idea is when you're on stage, it's to play with the most spontaneity and improvise. So that contradiction is funny to me sometimes. But I think the difference is if you're watching a thought-provoking film, it's almost like a really detailed composition because the writer or script writer or director has obviously taken their time to write this story and in detail and have all and like be aware of all those little minute details like the angles and lighting and stuff. So if you were to compare it to music, it's kind of the same way. I'd say in a more compositional aspect though, because it's not unless you're talking about a film that was just completely improvised. But I like that. I like that idea of someone being behind the scenes, slowly crafting this thing, just like if you were to compose some music.
Great. So the next question says, you talk about the positives of the pandemic, which was really enlightening to hear as a fellow musician. What is the thing that you've taken from the pandemic into the new normal?
I think definitely a sense of routine that I wouldn't say I had. I think when the pandemic came out, it was just at the beginning of my last year at Trinity, so my fourth year. And in fourth year, there's the workload compared to the beginning is less in terms of going to classes anyway. But I think I definitely in the first few years of Trinity, I the routine that I should have had wasn't there. So I did feel a bit like, okay, time to catch up. And I was like, well, I've been given the amazing chance to catch up because there's nothing else to do, literally nothing else to do. So that was, yeah, I think definitely having that space was important for me.
Great. Our next question is, there's often a need to rush / seeing your friends succeed when you art, which makes us feel impatient. Sorry, there's often a need to rush your career. That's what they said. Um, what would the top tips for having the patience that you spoke about earlier be?
I'd say really trust in the ability to learn your instrument and at the highest level. I think if you see your friends or peers, being elevated and stuff, I can understand when you feel like, oh, I want to be at that position too. But you'd be surprised, like if you really take care of your instrument, like all the minute details, it is a sense of longevity that you will have that you wouldn't have maybe got if you were rushed to these heights. And because I think the danger when you get rushed to certain heights, because of the hype around you or certain level of you being pushed, because you're so busy or whatever, certain details and fundamentals you might just skip over because they like what you're doing. But if you are trying to be a complete musician, I think give yourself a chance to really learn your instrument, to really learn if it's jazz music, to really understand the genre to a level of depth. So when it's time for you to do your own music, and wherever it takes, even if it's not completely traditional jazz, there's a certain grounding that you have. And I think people will recognize that, maybe not straight away, but I truly believe that if you put in that work at the early stages with a level of consistency, you might even reach higher heights than the person you were originally watching.
So it's kind of the tortoise and the hare story
Yeah,
of a sustainable, slow approach.
right. Yeah.
Our next question is, someone says, I'm 16 and I'm a drummer. Who would you advise me to listen to?
I assume you're a jazz drummer. So I mean, yeah, it's just like the pianos I was talking about. There's certain piano players you can't avoid. You have to like. I'm sorry, but it's the same for drums. There's definitely been a preference, but there's certain people that have just made such a stamp on in the jazz lineage. Like you have to be aware of them. So a few players like early jazz drummers like Sid Catlett. He's like one of the first drummers to put together the drum kit in the way that we know it as. So he's very important because he shaped the way the drums are in terms of how the drums have been set up. And he was the first drummer to kind of start the idea of the swing rhythm on the snare drum. And so he was really important. And as you go further on, you have the whole big band era. Um, like so much drummers like Chick Webb, he was amazing big band drummer. And yeah, you have that whole era with Count Basie. So checking out Count Basie's drummers and what's his name? Duke Ellington. How can I forget? Sorry. Duke, checking out Duke Ellington drumming because big band drumming is a big part of the jazz, jazz culture. Because from there you can see how the drumming kind of changed when it started to get into a small band. So when it gets into small band to like the bebop era, there's drummers like Kenny Clark, who's really important because Kenny Clark approach and the ride cymbal really helped bring in the new bebop style after big band. So definitely Kenny Clark, and then from then there's like a host of bebop drummers like Max Roach. He's a very important drummer, and then when you want to go further on to something more stuff that starts to be a bit more experimental, you have drummers like Elvin Jones who revolutionized drumming again because through his understanding of the triplet and changing time. Yeah, it's so much. I could carry on for so much for a long time. I hope he's got a few names from what I said.
That's so interesting, and it's so great that you're so knowledgeable about all of this. This question, our next question again, is about jazz bands. What's it like playing in a jazz band? Do you prefer being at the front or in a collective group as part of the texture?
I mean, I'd prefer. I mean, I'm happy I play piano because I can be right in the background. I don't. I really like accompanying. I think that's a big thing for me because being a piano player, you're part of the rhythm section, which is like the bass, drums, and sometimes guitar as well. So your job most of the time is to really accommodate the people at the front. So the soloist, like the saxophonist or trumpet player, you. I really enjoy finding ways to find fitting accompaniment for whatever they're improvising in the moment. So I have to really be on my toes and really listening carefully and seeing if I can communicate with them effectively. And I just love the fact that when I'm playing with people, it's like there's so much like cross conversations happening at the same time. Some of them are overt, some of them subtle. So like even if there's a saxophone player soloing and there's the rhythm section underneath, so piano, drums, and bass, even though there's the main person is the saxophone, there's all these conversations happening, like really subtle things between the drummers and the bass, and then the piano and the bass, and the piano and the drums, and then the drums and the saxophone. It's like this constant cross communication, and I love hearing the subtleties and then bringing them out when you hear them. It's something that I really enjoy.
So do you approach playing like in a group, sort of in the rhythm section, as you say, um, differently to how you approach a solo performance?
Yeah, definitely. There's certain things that stay the same, but when you're with a rhythm section, the drummer is going to carry a lot of the rhythm and the pulse and that aspect of the music. But when you're by yourself, you have to be completely in charge of stating where the time is and creating that energetic swing feeling. And that's something that I'm consistently working at. I remember when I was young, in secondary school, I used to ask my teacher, like, but how, if you're playing by yourself, how does it have any rhythm? I was like, I didn't understand. Because then I listened to some piano players like Oscar Peterson play by himself, or piano players influenced him by him, like a guy called Monty Alexander. When they play piano by themselves, it's literally like they're dancing, and it's like a whole orchestra. I'm like, wow, like that's something I aspire to do, because if you can create all this rhythm by yourself, when you're with a band, it's only going to be heightened.
It's fantastic. So, how do you go about finding your own interpretation of jazz standards? And then they've put slash the Disney songs, etc.
Okay,
I think they're referring to your recording with Soul.
yeah. Well, I think the thing is, you have to really understand the origins of the song first, because you can't really manipulate something without knowing. You're not gonna know what you're manipulating if you don't know what the original thing is, right? So it's really having an understanding of the song. Like, and a lot of these jazz standards all have lyrics too. So the lyrics are obviously going to be a big thing in terms of conveying the message of the song. So saying, listen to original versions and having an understanding of the lyrics. And it's cool because when you listen to more than one version, you can start to see certain links in terms of maybe at this chord, they all play a certain chord there, or on this certain section, they all have different versions of chords they play. Because the thing about a jazz standard is you can play a song, but there's so much ways of approaching it, especially harmonically, even though it's all the same song. So the more versions you know, the more choices you have. And then when it's time for you to make your own versions, you have all these things to draw from and mix together, plus applying what you feel like in the moment. So I think, yeah, a big thing is listen to as much versions, listen to the original, having a real understanding of what they were trying to capture, and then listening to versions in detail, and then expressing yourself with all the stuff that you've heard that you've been influenced by from what you've listened to.
That's really great advice. Yeah. Um, our next question is: do you have any aspirations to compose for TV or film or adverts?
Yeah, definitely. Opportunities like that have happened to me, but they didn't come. They haven't been come. Like they haven't. What's the word? They haven't had a chance to come to fruition yet. But it's definitely something I'll be into. There's a TV show in America. It's called The Shy. It's about Chicago, and the 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 composer for the TV show is a jazz trumpeter called Marquise Hill, and it's just amazing because it's like you can hear all this jazz in the background and how he manages to meld it in with this like kind of rough Chicago like landscape. I was like, yeah, that's really cool how he does that. It's something I definitely want to try one day.
Great. Um, so the next person asks: how did you keep yourself from burning out during your time at Trinity?
Well, as I said, I used to get jazzed out. So as soon as that happens, I mean, the worst of it would be like not listening to jazz and not practicing. But I would not recommend that. I would say,
Jazz detox.
yeah. And when I did feel like it was a bit much, I think definitely giving myself a break from the instrument was good for me. And I'm not saying don't practice for a month, but if I've been playing the piano every day, just giving myself 2 days, because I found that when I took the gap, when I come back to piano, like I'd really appreciate the piano again. Like I was like, okay, this is why I'm here. This is why I love to play this music, and this is why I'm at the school, because I want to learn. But I think it's different for everyone, I guess. Some people, like, if they're into sport, they can play some football to distract them or something like that. But for me, I definitely like listening to something else other than jazz helped me a lot.
Great. The next person asks, could you tell us any recommendations to practice improvisations?
Mhm. Yeah, sure. And yeah, so this goes back to that paradox I was talking about of, if it's all spontaneity and improvise, how do you practice that, right? Well, I mean, the idea of jazz, I guess, is having. So when I was talking about playing in a group and being able to have these conversations between all the instruments, is like akin to speaking a language. You want to be able to have such an understanding of the language you can speak fluently with other musicians. So the way to reach that level of fluency is through like very detailed listening of jazz records. Because the more you listen, the more you start recognizing all these patterns and trends. I call them words and phrases. Like if Miles Davis plays a certain thing, then I listen to this complete unrelated track and they play the exact same thing. You start to make these connections, and stuff you notice like that, you definitely want to copy and have on your instrument. So all that stuff is like building up your vocabulary. Just like I'm talking to you right now, I'm using words that I've used before, but I'm just using them in a way that is spontaneous to reacting what you're asking me. But all the words I'm using are not new to me. I'm obviously aware of these words. So it's the same thing for jazz. It's building up enough vocabulary in terms of words and phrases so that when it's time to improvise in the moment, you're not just making stuff up, but you're using the words you know and then mixing them around in relation to what's happening in the moment. So there's a fine balancing act, because you can reach a point where you're so fluent, you can say whatever you want. You can say gibberish and it sounds good. You reach a point where you can really express yourself in a way that resonates with the audience, and in a way that's very personal and unique to you, because none of us can sound the same as someone, but definitely having um spending time with the masters and listening to how they approach will always have a positive effect, because it will give you substance and some depth to what you're doing. Because if you go to improvise straight away and in thinking, oh, I'm just doing my thing, it's how I feel, that's definitely valid. But you want to have the harmonic landscape and rhythmic landscape to support your ideas, what you're doing. And the only way to get that is through the extended and detailed listening of records and transcribing those records.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Um, our next question says, I really like film music and want to write for films. Do you have any favourite film scores, and what would you recommend that I listen to?
Well, I have to say Soul now, because it really was. I mean, I felt like a child watching that. I think it came out on Christmas, and I watched it in Christmas in like in the night on Christmas on 25th, and I was just like squealing. I was like, oh my gosh, why wasn't this here when I was 10 years old? So I think the composer, film composer for that is a great piano player called John Baptiste. And he's really interesting because he's an amazing jazz piano player, but he's very versatile and has all these different styles. So I think I would advise you, like, even if you have a certain approach you have, is to still keep yourself open to other styles, because you can find a way to mix it and to make it relevant to whatever you're trying to score for it, and it will sound fresh and different.
Great. So the next person says, hi, what's your opinion on live jazz clubs and bars? Do you think they still have a role in today's music scene?
You definitely do that. I literally played a small little bar last night, and it was such a vibe. I think I'd say, especially now, like I don't take it for granted because I haven't had a chance to play in those scenarios. I mean, jazz in general is not the most popular music in like greater, wider society, but it definitely has a place. Like if you ever go to a jazz club, wherever you are in the UK or whatever, I think there's a certain magic that you will get that you won't see in other types of music, just due to the nature that is the improvisation is such an important part. I think for me, when I play in like a bar or anything like that, even last night, it's really funny. We were playing and the saxophone player, my good friend Ruben Fox, is playing this beautiful ballad. It's really slow tempo, and but the audience was like having a whole conversation, and like it was funny because then the drummer was like shh, shh, like, and like it's like shh, kept on turning to shush, and like it's like things like that is funny to contend with because it's like can you grab the audience enough for them to realize, or sometimes the audience is just disrespectful and they don't care. But I think the beauty of playing something like that is some of those people are not avid jazz listeners, so it's cool to see how we can play in a way that can bring in a new audience sometimes. So I definitely think playing in bars and stuff still has a relevant place.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, of taking the challenging situation where maybe they're not quite listening for an advantage of kind of introducing them to the genre. I really like that idea. The next question says, when a composer hands out a piano part, after the head, do you like to have only changes and slashes, or do you like to have some rhythm and melody suggestions?
You say it one more time, some double check. So.
When a composer hands out a piano part, after the head, do you like to have only changes and slashes, or do you like to have some rhythm and melody suggestions?
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I'll just have the chord symbols with slashes up, because at that point in improvising, so if it's a melody and stuff, and if there's certain like rhythmic figures and stuff, that definitely should be written in. And but if there's anything specific in your composition or the music you're playing, then definitely write that in the solos as well. But if it's just like a improvisation on the form, I think it's best to just keep the chords and leave the piano free to, improvise accompaniment in the moment, because that's when the cool thing happens, when he's listening to the soloist and the soloist is listening to the or the pianist or whatever instrumentalist. That's when the cool stuff happens, because they're actively listening to each other. So I say sometimes writing less creates a chance for more things to happen. So it depends, but I preferably, depending on the song, because it all depends on context, but preferably just give me the chords and I'll see if I can create something fitting for the moment.
Great. The next person asks, can you give me any tips for practice? I like playing some things, but not some of the other things that my teacher gives me.
Yeah, that sounds like me. That was me up until very recently. I think, I mean, the way I go over that is, if we're talking specifically jazz, like jazz is such a hard thing to have to create like a routine to, because there's so much aspects of it. And of course, the main aspect is improvisation. So I think it's the best thing for me, what really started to help me over, especially in the pandemic, and I was doing a lot of practice, was was starting to create a practice journal, just to write down the little thoughts I had, and also just to give me a sense of structure. And the good thing I did was, I think, when I was lacking a lot of structure back in Trinity, just personally, I wasn't strict enough with myself. But last year, when I was a bit more disciplined, I found that you can split, there's ways to split jazz up into sections. Obviously, like, it's not a one fit all like situation, but for me, I thought, if I can start my practice off with this technical practice that I want to avoid and I don't like doing, if I just get that out of the way, that's my first thing. I'll do that for 15 or 20 minutes and I get that out of the way. And now that's done, like, let me move on to the harmonic part of this. So if I'm a piano player, certain voicings and chords and doing certain exercise, and that's the other part. Then maybe the third part would be the transcription process of copying a soloist that I really like, and learning like some licks and putting it on all the keys. So it's, for me, it's like, the practicing is like, it's easy to practice the stuff you like, and that stuff that comes easy to you. It's so easy to do that, and you can fall into the trap of doing that, and you could do that for 5 hours a day, and in a way you're practicing. And if you look in the bigger like scheme of things, are you actually improving? Probably not, because we're not addressing the weaknesses. I mean, the best way to force yourself to practice that stuff is to get exposed. This is just quite sad. You play on a gig and they call this really fast tempo and you're unable to keep up, and you're like, you quickly learn that, okay, so when my teacher was telling me to practice my scales and get to reach a level, a technical facility at this level, or to practice a certain thing, and if you're on a gig and there's some hard chord changes, but you don't have an understanding of that harmony because you decided to practice something that was came easier to you. I think that's the best thing is to find you find out quickly when you're lacking on a gig, and you go right back home and try address it. So, but to avoid that, the embarrassment, maybe listen to your teacher.
So our next question is related to that last one, and they just say, "How do you practice?"
Yeah, well, it's kind of what I said. I only really recently got a sort of process. When I was younger, it was very much like I'd come home from school and just mess about on the piano, like no structure at all. And I did that for ages, and there was definitely a lot I learned from that, especially for jazz, just playing along to stuff and just improvising. But after a while, I kind of reached a wall. Like I wasn't getting. I mean, I kind of cut myself off because I wasn't doing any technical practice. I wasn't doing any detailed harmonic, um, like research or stuff like that or explorations. So for me, that got me to a certain level of having ability to improvise. But when I needed to start to really be able to play with a certain level of detail and finesse, it's like definitely started to copy some of the stuff that I was hearing. It goes back to like that focused listening I was talking about and imitation. So in jazz, the transcription process is a massive thing. The idea of you listening to something you really like or a really nice solo or a really nice phrase and learning that phrase and being able to play it the same way they did with a similar articulation and timing and sense of swing. You want to have you want to see if you can encapsulate all of that because that will like feed into how you want to sound. So that was the next step for me. I think transcribing and copying a lot of my favorite piano players and saxophonists, trumpeters, whatever instrument it was definitely imitating from there. And I did that up until a point. I mean, and but still not really having a routine. Even when I was at Trinity, I wouldn't say I had a routine. It was still very much like I'd still go play, and it was very unstructured. But the surprising thing was I was still getting better. And I used to think nowadays, I think, why was I still improving even though I didn't have, compared to some other piano players who probably had a vigorous thing, I was still improving at a faster rate than them. I'm still like, yeah, I always used to think like, what was the difference? What was making me able to progress? And it really comes down to the listening, the amount of jazz I did in terms of listening. Because obviously you have to do the technical stuff in your instrument. You have to be an instrument to improve, especially for jazz. The amount you listen to really informs like you're playing like without even having to practice your instrument, but definitely practice your instrument. But the amount of listening I did from 10 years old, all that those many hours on YouTube, it meant that when it was time for me to play with a band, someone would play something and even though I hadn't practiced, I'd be like, wow, I recognize that. I know exactly how to respond to that without actually have been at my instrument practicing that. And that was something that I was like, okay, that's something that I really have, and that's a strong skill that I have. But of recently, I was like, I want to be able to back that up with, a more detailed understanding of that by copying it and the technical aspects and harmonic aspects and like the voicing aspects of that to back it up. And that's when I started to do more of a practice journal thing and split up my practice. But the beauty of it is there's always more than one way to learn. But the end goal in jazz is to speak, fluent jazz language and be able to improvise freely and play, have beautiful musical conversations with people. That's the goal. I think if you have a goal for your end of your practice, a goal for your practice, that sometimes it feels like you're practicing and it's like, what am I doing this for? Like, what am I aiming for? Maybe it's a short-term goal, like you've got a gig next week, you need to learn the music for that. But I think definitely having a long-term goal of what am I actually aiming for? What level of musicianship am I trying to reach? I think that helps me get to the piano every day because I'm like, the fact that I'm here is because I'm investing into something in the future that I don't know is going to happen yet, but it's worth me being at the piano. So when it is happen, I'm prepared.
That's great. So the next question is, what's your favorite make of piano to play?
I mean, I've had a chance to play a lot of Steinways, which has been great. But for the first time a few weeks ago, I had a chance to play a Fazioli, like on a solo piano gig I did, and that was, I mean, I've always seen the pianos, but to finally play one, it blew my mind. Now everything I play now is just like a step down. Yeah, Fazioli is amazing.
What do you normally practice on?
Thing is, I say all this stuff, but I don't have a piano at home. I've got a keyboard. I've got a Roland and a Nord. But when I'm still able to go to Trinity. So when I'm at Trinity, I mean the jazz room's got a Steinway, so I practice on that a lot.
Great. Our next question is, there's a lot of new research about mindfulness and music. Do you have any pre-performance routines you could share with us?
I really wish I could say something really like no life changer, but no, it's more like I have water, I drink some water, and I'm very probably nervous. Like as I said, I wouldn't say nerves, but like just the anticipation of what's going to happen, mixed with a certain level of excitement. But once I get to the piano, it's like that's when I become clear-headed, or most of the time anyway. That's when I become clear-headed, and that's when I'm in a certain zone. I find that when I play with, especially with my favorite musicians, I reach a zone where it's like I'm not even thinking. Like everything just flows. But yeah, I don't really have any pre-performance like routines or anything like that.
So the next person would like to know, they're a 16-year-old and they want to be a jazz singer. What opportunities are there in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there's loads. I mean, depending where you're living, but I think most boroughs in the country have like a local music service. So they definitely will have like local big bands and jazz bands and stuff like that. I mean, hopefully, but if not, we have the internet, which is an amazing thing. There's so much. I mean, I learned so much off the internet, especially when I was younger. Like I was like, okay, how to play jazz piano on YouTube, and then 10 million things come up. Then it's my job to like sieve through all the rubbish to something that's relevant to me. But nowadays, there's so much courses online. A place I recommend is a website called openstudios.com, and it's run by a pianist called Peter Martin, and he's like a legend. He's played with all the amazing jazz singers, all the musicians. So he's got for each instrument, he's got a few like mentors who've got like a series of lessons, of like really in-depth lessons. And there's a singer called Diane Reeves, who's an amazing, very well-known jazz singer. And she's got a few courses on the Open Studios website. I think that would be a great introduction into like a sort of understanding the technical side of jazz. But also, as I said, just listening to a lot of music. So I mean I can give you some singers to check out. I don't know if it's a female or male, but I'll give you a mix of both. But there's Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, even Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett. Then there's modern day singers as well, like Jasmine Horn, Veronica Swift. Um, yeah, there's a few singers to listen to.
Well, our next question actually was somebody asking for recommendations of jazz singers. So that's great. Thanks for telling us. Um, so, our last couple of questions now. Someone asks, can I put you on the spot? In your opinion, who is the greatest jazz musician of all time? Other than you, of course.
That's a very evil question. I don't know how to answer that. I can give you some names, but I but yeah, that's a strong. I can say he's one of my biggest influence the last 2 or 3 years. A pianist called Ahmed Jamal. I'm not going to say he's the greatest of all time, but right now he's one that made one of the biggest effects on how I approach the piano for sure. Yeah.
And our last question is, can you come and play at the RNCM for us?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I'd love to bring my trio along. I have a trio with me on piano, Will Cleesby on drums, and Will Sash on bass. And yeah, they're amazing. So it'd be lovely to come play one day.
Oh, well, that would be fabulous to hear you play, hopefully in person. Thank you so much for joining us, Deschanel. It's been really lovely to meet you, and it's been so interesting to hear about your journey. Thank you for taking the time to speak to our young performers today and answer their questions. We wish you the very best of luck in the future.
Thank you so much, and yeah, and thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Next week we'll be interviewing Max Revel, who was BBC Young Dancer of the Year 2019. Bye.